So Hare Krishna and welcome to this Īśopaniṣad class. So after quite some hiatus, after quite some time, then we are starting. So what I'm going to do is see this 9th, 10th and 11th mantra. These were speaking about this Avidya and Vidya. Okay, so I'll just do a brief recap of what we discussed in the 9th mantra, then the 10th mantra, and then we will go to 11th mantra, which we are planning to discuss today. Okay, so we'll get to this, we'll get to the divisions. Before that, this 9th mantra we discussed, I just increase the size of this so that you can see. Okay, here you go. So andham tamah pravishanti ye avidyam upasate tato bhuya ivete tamo yao vidyayam rataha. Those who engage in the culture of nescient activities shall enter into the darkest region of ignorance. Worse still are those engaged in the culture of so-called knowledge. So here the two aspects of Vidya and Avidya were spoken. So Avidya and Vidya both take one down to the darkest region. So Avidya takes one to the dark region and Vidya takes one to the darkest region. Okay, that's what we discussed. So if you remember, we spoke about this 9th, 10th and 11th mantra as talking about only these two things, Vidya and Avidya. Okay, and first mantra, that is 9th mantra, it spoke about how Avidya also leads to dark region and Vidya takes to even darker region. Okay, and we discussed how Avidya speaks about there's a comparative study between Vidya and Avidya and how Avidya is dangerous, but then Vidya, which comes in these three specific forms, this is what Srila Prabhupada discussed in the purport about real education, or sorry, the mundane education, the materialistic education that is being imparted to children in school now, and also throughout the universities, then the Vedavada Rataha, and then Maya Pahrita Jnana. So these three, although are in the shape of Vidya, are in the semblance of Vidya, but then these three take one away from spiritual realization, from Krishna consciousness. So in that way, they are more dangerous than Avidya itself, than ignorance itself. Okay, and we discuss these aspects. This is mantra 9. And in mantra 10, we spoke about again Avidya and Vidya. Anyad evahur vidyaya, anyad ahur avidyaya, iti shushramadhiranam, yenas tat vichachakshire. The wise have explained that one result is derived from the culture of knowledge and that a different result is obtained from the culture of nescience. So Avidya takes one to a different destination and Vidya takes one to a different destination. So this mantra 10 introduces a distinction between Vidya and Avidya. Okay, initially, the 9th mantra said Vidya and Avidya both take one to the darkest regions. Now, Avidya takes one to a different realm, Vidya takes one to a different realm, and one has to understand this. Okay. So, if you remember, in the last classes also we discussed that Vidya and Avidya, how this 9th, 10th and 11th mantra are organized is that Vidya and Avidya in 9th mantra takes one down. Okay, and 10th mantra speaks about Vidya taking one to a different destination, Avidya taking one to a different destination. And 11th mantra will speak about how Vidya and Avidya both take one or both help one to transcend death. Okay. So, we'll just get to today's mantra. And just to give you a recap of what we discussed in mantra 10, these were the things that were discussed. Materialistic knowledge, that's Avidya. Srila Prabhupada spoke about the universities as centers of nescience, and he specifically spoke about nationalism. Okay, and then real Vidya is to be attained from a Dhira, and Srila Prabhupada at the start of the purport itself, he spoke about the 18 items of knowledge, which is basically coming from Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, text 8 to 12. And we also spoke about how the knowledge should be gained from Dhira and how Adhira cannot give perfect knowledge and cannot lead the mass of people to the right path. So this is basically a brief recap of what we discussed in mantra 9 and 10. So with that as the context, we will get to mantra 11. And before that, again, just a small recap. Mantra 1, 2, So mantra 1 is speaking about this Ishavasya principle, so Ishavasya Idam Sarvam. And then mantra 2 and 3, the results of following it, results of not following it, Kurvaneveha Karmani, and then Asurya Namate Loka. So that is based on the Ishavasya principle, that is in mantra 1. Then 4 and 5 is a description of the inconceivable Lord. And 6 and 7 we saw together how a Mahabhagavata's vision should be according to the previous slokas, how the inconceivable Lord should be understood or is understood by a Mahabhagavata, his internal vision as well as his external vision, how he implements that vision internally, how his qualities change, or how his qualities are, not change, how his qualities are, and how he sees other living entities with respect to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mantra 8, we spoke about the Lord's transcendental form, and there we saw around 10 qualities of the Lord. And once that is done, then the theme changes. Then we come to this Vidya and Avidya concept that we discussed now. And then from tomorrow onwards, we'll go to this demigod and impersonal worship from 12, 13, 14 mantras. These three, 12, 13, and 14 are combined together because they speak about Upasana. Okay, 9, 10, 11 is speaking about Vidya. 12, 13, 14 will speak about Upasana and the distinctions between them. So we'll get to that tomorrow. So this is today's verse. Vidyayam cha vidyam cha yas tadvedo bhayam saha avidyayam rityam tirtva vidyayam ritam ashnute. Only one who can learn the process of nescience and that of transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. Okay, so here two things are discussed again, Vidya and Avidya, and tad vidyam cha avidyam cha yah. A person who cultivates knowledge, Vidya, as well as the culture of Avidya. Tad Vedo Ubhayam Saha. Vedo means one who knows. Ubhayam means both. Which are the two things here? Vidya and Avidya. Tad Vedo Ubhayam Saha. Avidyaya Mrityum Tirtva. By the culture of nescience, please the word here. By culture of nescience, that is Avidyaya Mrityum Tirtva. He transcends repeated death. And Vidyayam Amritam Ashnute. By Vidya, by culture of knowledge, Amritam or deathlessness, he enjoys. Now, we might say or we might think that Avidya Mrityum Tirtva and Vidyayam Amritam Ashnute both refer to the same thing, right? Transcending death and attaining deathlessness seems to be the same, but there's a subtle difference which we will see in the course of discussing this purport and also when we discuss the Acharya's commentaries, specifically Vedanti Deshika. He gives a distinction of how this Avidyayam Mrityum Tirtva and Vidyayam Amritam Ashnute, these two are to be understood in different. It's just like this. Always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. Although these two are same, but still, there's a subtle difference, and that's how it's understood. So similarly, Avidyayam Mrityum Tirtva and Vidyayam Amritam Ashnute, they are same, but then there's a subtle difference also. And if you see now, the same result is being obtained. Mantra 9, the same result is obtained, one goes down, and Mantra 11 also the same result is obtained, but using the same Avidya and Avidya, one goes up. One does not go down. So the themes in the purport, Srila Prabhupada discusses that how we desire immortality. It's an inherent nature of the living entity to be eternal, to remain immortal. So that desire is there. Okay. And what does he do? It says, mentioned here, Avidyaya Mrityum Tirtva. So Avidya, as we have discussed in Mantra 10 and 9, and we will discuss in this purport also, Avidya specifically refers to materialistic knowledge. Okay, and those who are completely materialistic engrossed, what do they think? By materialistic knowledge, I can transcend death. And if you have read this 11th mantra, you would also know that Srila Prabhupada speaks about Hiranakashipu. He thought that by his materialistic endeavors, which is actually categorized as Avidya in our Vedic literature, he can transcend death, and he somehow tried to fool Lord Brahma also, tricked him, basically, tried to trick him. But then ultimately that did not happen. So Avidya, as mentioned in this verse, is to be understood in a different way. It does not mean that by materialistic knowledge one can transcend death. No. Although it's mentioned as Avidya here, we have to understand what it actually means. So there will be two things which we will be discussing in this purport. One is the path of Avidya and the culture of Avidya. Path of Avidya is this path of materialistic knowledge that people pursue, And the culture of avidya is when avidya itself is used for transcending the ignorance, for transcending avidya. So this will discuss what is knowledge, vidya, what is nescience, avidya, and how vidya and avidya should come together to make a balanced program. Okay, we based on what we have discussed till now, from our epistemology sessions and till mantra 10, we could understand that vidya would mean spiritual knowledge, avidya would mean materialistic knowledge, and materialistic knowledge can also be used in Krishna's service. So that's in a one-line gist of what we are going to discuss, but we'll elaborate on that. And so this balanced program is dharma, artha, kama and moksha. So all this dharma, artha, kama, moksha is part of the varnashma system, which is categorized as avidya in our Vedic literatures. Okay, so how is that? We will see how moksha also is a part of avidya. We will see that. And the purpose of vidya ultimately is devotional service. Okay, so this is what we are going to discuss today. And the plan would be that most of the points or the themes about vidya and avidya that we are going to discuss in this purport, we have already seen several of them or the concepts in the previous mantras. So we'll be Srila Prabhupada does the critique of modern civilization, how by avidya people cannot attain deathlessness, and people cannot, or they have to undergo repeated birth, death, old age and disease. Okay, so so that's how it's going to be. That's how Srila Prabhupada writes it here. And then vidya is pure devotional service. Okay, and the scriptures like Upanishads, Vedanta Sutra, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, they direct us towards this proper vidya, which should be attained or which should be gathered by disciplic succession. This perfect knowledge comes through disciplic succession, and then ultimately we have to render in devotional service. So the discussion is going to be similar, okay, but the points or the themes are going to be similar, but the points that Srila Prabhupada makes will be different based on this particular mantra about deathlessness. So we'll see the focus will be on mrityum, tirtva and amritam ashnute. Okay, avidyaya mrityum tirtva, how by avidya we can come or we can transcend death, mrityum tirtva, and how by vidya amritam ashnute, how by vidya one can attain deathlessness, one can enjoy the deathlessness aspect. So see the purport will be following these two. Purport will be following so Prabhupada will be speaking about death, about birth, death, old age and disease, about immortality, about what is amrita, what is transcending death, what is deathlessness. So those concepts will be there. So the purport will revolve around that, and the points will be made based on that. But because it's speaking about vidya and avidya, again there will be a critique of this modern education as well as speaking about devotional service to the Lord, pure devotional service to the Lord. So these two would be here, and yes. So okay, so the plan which I was about to tell you was that we will be reading most of the sections from this purport, and I have several references that we would like to read where Srila Prabhupada speaks about multiple things, what avidya actually means. Okay, avidya, and if we see in Srila Prabhupada writing itself, there is a core concept or there is a method in which Srila Prabhupada presents avidya. Okay, and then so we will see in which all different ways Srila Prabhupada presents avidya. Okay, what are different points that he covers when he's speaking about avidya, and we will also see the concept of paravidya and aparavidya. Okay, so there is paravidya, which is transcendental knowledge, and aparavidya, which is material knowledge. So here when we say avidyaya mrityum tirtva, this avidya can be related to this aparavidya. Okay, and we will see how that happens while discussing the purport itself, and we'll specifically see one reference from Chaitanya Charitamrita where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is speaking, or sorry, when Sanatana Goswami engages in Bhagavatam discussions. Okay, even though he was still the minister under the Nawab. We will get to all those details. Okay, so no need to worry, but the plan is that I'll be reading most of the times, and then we'll also go through the references, and based on the time that we may have, we will also see the Acharya's commentaries. Specifically, we'll concentrate a little bit on Vedanti Deshika's commentary and Bhaktivinoda Thakur's commentary, like this. Okay. So Srila Prabhupada starts that since the creation of the material world, everyone has been trying to attain a permanent life, but the laws of nature are so cruel that no one has been able to avoid the hand of death. So at the start itself, Srila Prabhupada speaks about death, because this verse itself is speaking about death. It's mrityum tirtva and amritam ashnute. When you speak about amritam, that is transcending or deathlessness, the state where one exists eternally, that is called as Amritam, okay, where there is no death. Amritam means where there is no death, and Brityum Tirtva means there is no death. So Srila Prabhupada hits that point first. He says, although everyone has been trying to attain a permanent life, but the laws of nature are so cruel that no one has been able to avoid the hand of death. So therefore, the desire is there. The population of this world is so much. 700 crores, 7 billion people. I think yes, 700 crores, 700 crores, leading to 50 crores. But not even one single person knows. Rather, the devotees know, obviously, but it's a very small percentage. Apart from that, nobody knows that although the desire is there, and we are speaking only about human beings. In fact, all the species of life, 8,400,000 species of life, nobody wants to experience death. And we have discussed this before also, that even if we put a finger in front of an ant, he will try to avoid all the hindrances. So every living entity tries to avoid himself. If mosquito is flying, you try to swat a mosquito, it goes away here and there because it's trying to protect its body. So everyone means the 8,400,000 species of life, everybody is trying to attain a permanent life. Nobody wants death. But the laws of nature are so cruel that no one has been able to avoid the hand of death. Although the endeavor is there, but nobody knows how to do that. No one wants to die, nor does anyone want to become old or diseased. The law of nature, however, does not allow anyone immunity from old age, disease, or death. So the laws of nature, which is given by the Lord, are so cruel but that it does not allow anybody immunity from old age, disease, or death. So these three are bound to happen. Nor has the advancement of material knowledge solved these problems. Okay, the text or the mantra is speaking about avidyayam vrityum tirtva. By avidya, we can transcend brityu, but Srila Prabhupada writes here that this kind of avidya, which is the advancement of material knowledge as discussed in mantra 9 and 10, it cannot solve these problems. It cannot lead you to mrityum tirtva. It will not happen. So we are not going to speak about this advancement of material knowledge as avidya here. Srila Prabhupada will speak about avidya in the way it is understood. But actually, avidya is to be understood as something which will help us transcend the problem of death. Material science can discover the nuclear bomb to accelerate the process of death, but it cannot discover anything that can protect man from cruel hands of old age, disease, and death. So Srila Prabhupada is repeating the same point. This has to be stressed for people to understand that the actual problem is old age, disease, and death. And does not matter how many advancements we come through, but still we can at the most accelerate the process of death, but we cannot solve the process of death. We cannot solve or we cannot stop death from coming. So therefore, material science or avidya, as it's normally understood, will not solve the problem of death. It will not do mrityum tirtva. It will not stop. It will not stop. It will not transcend the process of death. And then he gives the example of Hiranakashipu. So Hiranakashipu is the epitome of the materialistic advancement. So that's why Srila Prabhupada present is here saying, see, we are trying to conquer nature, or non-devotees or materialistic people are trying to conquer this material nature. And so many advancements have been made and so much effort, so much money and so much energy is being put to transcend that. And although we are trying to do that, say one famous example, or what Srila Prabhupada always used to speak on, was the man's endeavor to go to the moon or to higher planets. Okay, but although they have, or from last 200 years, people have been observing the other planets. They are trying to go to the other planets, but still they have not been successful. Okay, all that's pretended as if they have gone to the moon, but Srila Prabhupada did tell us that they did not go to the moon, and so many other theories have also come up that actually they did not go to the moon. And if you compare the current situation with Hiranyakashipu was literally the lord of the planetary systems. So he could travel to all the different planets. He had conquered the Swargaloka. He was the lord of the Bilaswarga, the lower 7 planet systems already. Okay, the only planets which he had not conquered was maybe the higher 3-4 planetary system, because he had nothing to gain there. There's no sense enjoyment there. So, and there's now nobody to lord over. Nobody's interested to lord over there. So therefore he just left that. And Brahma's planet anyway, he's worshipped Lord Brahma. So Hiranyakashipu attained the position of a topmost materialist. But although he attained that much, but still he could not conquer over death. So that's the point that Srila Prabhupada is trying to establish with this, in this particular section. So Hiranyakashipu's desire is to become immortal, Amar, or Amritam, Amritam Ashnute, but then he did not. From the Puranas, we learn of the activities of Hiranyakashipu, a king who was very much advanced materially. Wanting to conquer cruel death by his material acquisitions and the strength of his nescience, his Avidya, he underwent a type of meditation so severe that the inhabitants of all the planetary systems became disturbed by his mystic powers. He forced the creator of the universe, the demigod Brahma, to come down to him. He then asked Brahma for the benediction of becoming Amara, by which one does not die. Brahma said that he could not award the benediction because even he, the material creator who rules all planets, is not Amara. So even the creator of the universe is not immortal. So what to speak of Hiranyakashipu, who is trying to lord over the whole universe based on avidya, based on ignorance. Srila Prabhupada continues, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, Brahma lives a long time, but that does not mean he is immortal. Right? A Brahma Bhuvana Loka Punaravartino Arjuna. To come back again. So Hiranya means gold and Kashipu means soft bed. This cunning gentleman, Prabhupada's play of words, cunning and gentleman also. Hiranyakashipu was interested in these two things, money and women. Right? Money means Hiranya, gold, and Kashipu means soft bed where women are enjoyed. And he wanted to enjoy them by becoming immortal. He asked from Brahma many benedictions in hopes of indirectly fulfilling his desire to become immortal. So basically, the highest sense gratification is considered as having lots of money and having women to enjoy. And if one can do that eternally, then one thinks that he is completely happy. So this is the deepest of ignorance, where one thinks that if he enjoys his body with having a nice soft bed and women around him and lots of gold to spend for his own sense gratificatory comforts, then that's the perfection of life. So this is the deepest of ignorance. This is avidya, and he wanted to continue in avidya, and he used avidya, or he tried to use avidya to become immortal. Okay, by not following the actual Vedic process of becoming immortal, which we will discuss. He asked from Brahma many benedictions in hopes of indirectly fulfilling his desire to become immortal. Since Brahma told him that he could not grant the gift of immortality, Hiranyakashipu requested that he not be killed by any man, animal, god, or any other living being within the 8,400,000 species. He also asked that he not die on land, in the air or water, or by any weapon. In this way, Hiranyakashipu foolishly thought these guarantees would save him from death. Okay, so this is very similar to materialistic endeavor. Hiranyakashipu was an atheist. Okay, he did not have any faith, or he was an enemy, or he considered Lord Vishnu as his enemy. But somehow he wanted to get immortality, which is possible only by pleasing Lord Vishnu. So he tried to attempt so many different things, but surrender to Lord Vishnu. Okay, that he did not want to do, but then he wanted to do so many other things. Somehow, some materialistic endeavor he should perform so that he remains immortal and enjoys in this material world. That was his concept. And the modern society is also like this. Okay, we are making so much effort to somehow reduce the miseries of life, but ultimately we have increased the miseries only. Okay, we discussed this in few last classes also, that we try to solve one problem, then we create further more problems. And Srila Prabhupada spoke, recently I was hearing this conversation, Srila Prabhupada spoke about that they wanted to go from one place to another place in a car. And for that, they have to drill petrol. Okay, and then suddenly now the situation has come up such that the oil or the petrol is going to stop. So the whole modern civilization is going to end. At the same time, because of petrol and other fuel like this, pollution has increased, climate change has increased, then this, they say there's a hole in the ozone layer also. So many things, so many problems have increased. The global warming has increased. So we try to solve one problem, make our life comfortable, we create much more problems. So Hiranyakashipu also, although he tried to solve his problems, after getting all these benedictions from Lord Brahma, he thought that he has, although the direct word as Amara is not used by Lord Brahma, but then somehow he has made sure that he is immortal by asking these kind of benedictions. But what actually happened? in the form of Prahalad, he actually became so frustrated that none of this was valuable for him. His only aim or only goal in life was to somehow defeat or subside Prahalad. Okay, so although he got everything, but still his whole life after that was led in frustration. Okay, and finally he was killed by Lord Nrsimhadev. So that's how it is. They try to solve problems, but then the frustration of material life never goes away unless one understands how to solve that problem of, basically one should understand that one is not this body, it's a spirit soul. But Hiranyakashipu did not do that. Although he had the knowledge, but still he was not ready to accept it. So in this way, Hiranyakashipu foolishly thought that these guarantees would save him from death. Ultimately, however, although Lord Brahma granted him all these benedictions, he was killed by the personality of Godhead in the form of Nrsimha, the Lord's half-lion, half-man incarnation. And no weapon was used to kill him, for he was killed by the Lord's nails, nor was he killed on the land, in the air, or in the water, for he was killed on the lap of that wonderful living being, Nrsimha, who was beyond his conception. Because Nrsimhadev is not one of the species, 8,400,000 species of life from whom Hiranyakashipu wanted safety, basically. He did not want to be killed by any of those who are created by Lord Brahma. But Nrsimhadev is not created by Lord Brahma. He was beyond his conception. The whole point here is that even Hiranyakashipu, the most powerful of materialists, could not become deathless by his various plans. What then can be accomplished by the tiny Hiranyakashipus of today, whose plans are thwarted from moment to moment? So each and every moment, whatever we do, the plans are thwarted. And specifically in the age of Kali, the age of Kali, it's the age of disturbance. So it does not mean only that only some people are disturbed and some people are not. Okay, it's everybody is disturbed. Everybody is disturbed. So even the scientists are disturbed. And each and everyone's plans are thwarted at each and every moment, are kind of destroyed at each and every moment. They try to do something and then they end up creating more problems, and it also leads to frustration. But because of their stubbornness in not attaining, in not trying to gain proper knowledge, because of being covered by avidya, by ignorance, they do not take up or they do not listen to devotees who preach to them. So Śrī Īśopaniṣad instructs us not to make one-sided attempts to win the struggle for existence. Everyone is struggling hard for existence, but the laws of material nature are so hard and fast that they do not allow anyone to surpass them. So laws of material nature have the final say in our life. So in order to attain a permanent life, one must be prepared to go back to Godhead. So this one should understand, that permanent life is not possible in this material universe, because the material universe itself is not permanent. It's temporary. It's created at a moment and then it is destroyed after 100 years of Brahma. So trying to attain an eternal life by staying within the material universe it's not that it's difficult or impossible, it's just that it's not possible at all. Okay, because the material universe itself is not going to stay. It itself has a start. There's a creator and there's a destroyer. There's creation and there's a destruction. So it's not going to stay. So permanent life is not possible. Just in principle itself, permanent life is not possible in this material world. So one must be prepared to go back to Godhead. One must transcend this material boundary. So for that, the process by which one goes back to Godhead is a different branch of knowledge. It is Vidya. So what has been discussed till now? Avidya as it is normally understood, or as it is directly understood. Okay. Avidya means ignorance. Ignorance means one is ignorant of his position or of his constitutional position as, or either, ignorant means he thinks that his body. We will see reference from Srila Prabhupada. Ignorance means that one thinks he's not, or rather he is the body and there's nothing beyond that. And the manifestation of ignorance is when one engages in fruitive activities. Avidya karma samnyaya. It says in Vishnu Puran that the manifestation of avidya is when one engages in fruitive work. Okay. And why one engages in fruitive work? Because he thinks by fruitive work he gets some fruits. By performing work within this material world, he'll get some benefits, he'll get fruits or the results. And those results he can use to enjoy himself. Not understanding that does not matter how much he tries to enjoy his body, he will not gain that satisfaction or he will not gain that happiness. So that is avidya. that is how normally Avidya is understood. This mantra is speaking of Avidya in a different way. We will get to that. Actually, what Srila Prabhupada is doing is he's taking us from the proper understanding of Avidya and Vidya to how Avidya and Vidya both work together to take one beyond the process of death. So the process by which one goes back to God is a different branch of knowledge, and it has to be learned from revealed Vedic scriptures such as the Upanishads, Vedanta Sutra, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. To become happy in this life and attain a permanent blissful life after leaving this material body, one must study this sacred literature and obtain transcendental knowledge. So happiness in this life also is possible only through these Vedic scriptures. Just by materialistic endeavor, it's not possible. That's why Krishna speaks in the 9th chapter, 2nd verse, Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam Pavitram Idamuttamam Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartam Avyayam. So Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam. So we can experience this. Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam Pavitram Idamuttamam. It's Pavitram, it's purifying. So we can experience that purifying nature of that knowledge. And Uttamam, the superiority of this knowledge is also experienced. And what does it do? Pavitram Idamuttamam Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartum Avyayam. One who accepts or one who imbibes this knowledge in his life, then he becomes happy also. Susukham Kartum Avyayam. So to become happy in this life, one must study this sacred literature and obtain transcendental knowledge. The conditioned living being has forgotten his eternal relationship with God and has mistakenly accepted the temporary place of his birth as all in all. So the Lord has kindly delivered the above mentioned scriptures in India and other scriptures in other countries to remind the forgetful human being that his home is not here in this material world. So it's the Lord who is supplying the Vedic scriptures in India and other scriptures, so which have come up recently in last 2500 years. Those scriptures are all meant for the people of that particular area. So although it might not speak about the highest goal of life, but still there is a process of gradual elevation of those people also. So the Lord has kindly delivered these scriptures. The living being is a spiritual entity and he can be happy only by returning to his spiritual home. So this also we have been discussing, that being a spiritual entity, it's in the Vishnu Purana again, the verse which we will see, these three are mentioned, that the Lord has three Shaktis. One is internal potency, one is the marginal potency, and one is the external potency. External potency is called as Avidya, and then the Para Prakriti. Okay, the Kshetragya is also Para Prakriti, and the energy, the internal potency of the Lord is also Para Prakriti. So both the living entity as well as the internal potency of the Lord is spiritual. So the living being is a spiritual entity, and therefore he can be happy only when he is in spiritual nature, when he is in spiritual home. So no matter how much he endeavors, he cannot be happy in this material world. We have discussed this several times before. So intelligent beings engage in culture of Vidya. From his kingdom, the personality of Godhead sends his bona fide servants to propagate this message, by which one can return to Godhead, and sometimes the Lord comes himself to do this work. So if you see in the previous slide, we discussed that the Lord gives the Vedic scriptures, okay, because he's merciful to those living entities who have forgotten their eternal relationship with the Lord. And these scriptures speak that the living being is spiritual. Aham Brahmasmi. Being a spirit, he can be happy only when he's in conjunction with the spirit, or when he goes to the spiritual home. And how does the Lord propagate that? By personally sending his bona fide servants to propagate this message, and sometimes the Lord himself comes. So this is the process of disciplic succession. Again, Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, or as we have been discussing in Īśopaniṣad, these two things, the perfect transcendental knowledge as revealed in the Vedic scriptures and the perfect parampara. These two, when they are together, then one can transcend, one can attain Amritam. Mrityum tirtva Amritam ashnute. Since all living beings are his beloved sons, his parts and parcels, God is more sorry than we ourselves to see the sufferings we are constantly undergoing in this material condition. So the Lord himself is sorry. The miseries of this material world serve to indirectly remind us of our incompatibility with dead matter. Okay. So why are there miseries in the material world? For a higher cause. So normally this question is asked, if God is all good, why are there miseries in this material world? But then the Lord is not responsible for these miseries. We are the people who are responsible for these miseries because we want to enjoy separately from the Lord. And our nature itself is to serve. Our nature is to serve, yes. But when the service is done on the spiritual realm, under the shelter of the spiritual potency of the Lord, then the miseries are not there. Okay, but because we, by inherent nature, the living entity is incompatible with matter, and the living entity has a desire to enjoy separately from Krishna. So Krishna arranges this material world so that the living entity can enjoy in this material world. Okay, so it's actually an act of mercy of the Lord that, okay, you want to enjoy, you will not be happy, but then this is the situation you have to be in this material world. Then the living entity tries to enjoy. But then, because of the inherent, the principally living in the spirit and matter are incompatible. So because of that, the living entity never gets that much amount of happiness or satisfaction which he wants to have separately from Krishna. So therefore he suffers. So who is responsible for the miseries? We ourselves, the living entities ourselves are responsible for the miseries. The Lord just arranges the things. And Srila Prabhupada gives the example of a government, and when a city is being planned, then prison house is also planned. The government officials don't want people to go to the prison. But if the citizens are not following the rules of the government for everybody's benefit, then they are put into prison to undergo that process. All the prison house is also under the direct control of the government, and the government does make the prison house because the government knows that there will be some people who will be problematic or who will create problems for other citizens. So they will be kept separately in the prison house. So although the government does not want people to go to the prison house, but still it is mandatory, it is to be done. Okay, so that does not mean that people who suffer in the prison house, the government is responsible for that. No, it's the people's responsibility himself. They themselves are responsible for their suffering. And the reason behind that is because the living entity or the people, the citizens want to become free, but in prison, the people are not free. And why they are not free? Because they are put into prison because of their activities alone. And there's an incompatibility. Okay. So similarly, this is how we should understand. The miseries of this material world serve to indirectly remind us of our incompatibility with dead matter. We are incompatible. The living entity is incompatible with dead matter. These two cannot mix together. Trying to enjoy dead matter never works. It will not work. So the miseries are bound to be there. So the more we endeavor to make ourselves happy within this material world, the more miseries would come because of this incompatibility. There's a tension between spirit and matter. Intelligent living entities generally take note of these reminders and engage themselves in the culture of Vidya or transcendental knowledge. So this is the sign of intelligence. Human life is the best opportunity for the culture of spiritual knowledge, and a human being who does not take advantage of this opportunity is called a Naradhama, the lowest of human beings. So this also we have discussed before. So the path of Avidya, it leads to repeated birth and death. So now again, just if we see from a hindsight, the purport, how it's moving, we have spoken about materialistic knowledge, which is an aspect of Avidya. And then Srila Prabhupada presents the necessity of Vidya, saying this transcendental literature is being sent by the Lord so that one can, and the Avidya or the sufferings, because of this ignorance, people are suffering in this material world. Even Hiranakashipu could not transcend that. So to transcend that, the Lord gives us the Vedic literatures and also sends his representatives. Okay. And once that is there, then one can transcend. And the miseries in the material world are there because one can understand, an intelligent person can understand that there is an incompatibility with that matter. And that gives an impetus for him to engage in spiritual activities like this. And then Srila Prabhupada speaks about the path of Avidya. And then after this, then he will contrast that with what is the actual way of transcending this Avidya. Okay, one way is through direct knowledge, through Vidya, through the Vedic scriptures. But Avidya itself can be used to transcend Avidya. How is that? We will see the purport and also in the references. Srila Prabhupada speaks about the path of Avidya, which leads to repeated birth and death. He says the path of Avidya or advancement of material knowledge for sense gratification is the path of repeated birth and death. As he exists spiritually, The living entity has no birth or death. Birth and death apply to the outward covering of the spirit soul, the body. Birth and death is for the body, but because we identify with the body, therefore we think that we are undergoing birth and death. But actually we are not undergoing birth and death. We are just experiencing the miseries arising from birth and death because we identify with this body. Death is compared to the taking off and birth to the putting on of outward garments. So this is directly from Bhagavad Gita. Vasamsi jirani yatha vihaya navani grihnati naroprani tatha sharinani vihaya jirani anyani sanyati navani dehi. So we have discussed this in our Bhagavad Gita classes. Foolish human beings who are grossly absorbed in the culture of Avidya, nescience, do not mind this cruel process. Enamored with the beauty of the illusory energy, they undergo the same miseries repeatedly and do not learn any lessons from the laws of nature. So in the previous slide, we saw that intelligent people, they learn from the miseries, that these miseries, although I do not want, but still they come. And therefore, I should find out a method to transcend these miseries. But those who are fully engrossed in the culture of Avidya or nescience, they do not mind this cruel process also. And we have experience of this. Actually, even Srila Prabhupada has spoken about this. So you go and talk to people, those who are completely in ignorance, they tell them, oh, what is there? Either they think that there's no life at all, there's no next life, this is the only life that I have got, and I have to enjoy this life. No, who knows what happens after death? So therefore, we'll just enjoy. And there are other people also who say, oh, it's part of life. Death is part of life. Nobody can stop it. And even I cannot stop it. So there's just no, it's like it's considered glorious that they are so equanimous, or they are so sober that they can accept all the miseries of life. They can accept all the all the nonsensical things that happen in the world, all the miseries of life. They can just accept and still remain calm and peaceful. So it's like a boost of their false ego. When they say, although this is there, it's part of life, and we'll go through this journey. The life is journey. It's a part of life, so therefore we'll go through that like this. So they do not mind this cruel process because they're enamored with the beauty of the illusory energy. They undergo the same miseries repeatedly and do not learn any lessons from the laws of nature. Therefore, the culture of Vidya or transcendental knowledge is essential for the human being. Sense enjoyment in the diseased material condition must be restricted as far as possible. Unrestricted sense enjoyment in this bodily condition is the path of ignorance and death. So, avidya karma samnyaya, which means that avidya or ignorance, it is manifested in fruitive activities. We discussed that some time back. So, Srila Prabhupada is speaking about sense enjoyment, and he's speaking about unrestricted sense enjoyment. So, this is the path of vidya, unrestricted sense enjoyment. And the path of vidya which can transcend one, or which can lead one to deathless state, or mrityum tirtva, the avidyaya which leads to mrityum tirtva, that is restricted sense enjoyment. We will see that in the forthcoming slides. I'm just giving before itself so that we can see the context, or we can understand the way this purport has been written by Srila Prabhupada. That Srila Prabhupada, after he writes this about unrestricted sense enjoyment, he will speak about restricted sense enjoyment, which is given in the Vedic literatures as dharma, artha and kama, which will ultimately lead one to moksha also. So that, although this dharma, artha, kama, moksha is an aspect of avidya, but still because there is a regulated sense enjoyment, so therefore there is this aspect of purification also. So one is engaged in avidya, but at the same time he's becoming purified as well. So that leads him to a deathless state. So if we see that with that perspective, we see this. So sense enjoyment must be restricted as far as possible. Unrestricted sense enjoyment in this bodily condition is the path of ignorance and death. The living entities are not without spiritual senses. Every living being in its original spiritual form has all the senses, which are now materially manifested, being covered by the material body and mind. So we do have spiritual senses. Okay, it's not that the spirit does not have any senses. Once we become liberated, go back to Godhead, or once one becomes liberated, there are no senses at all. Spiritual senses are there, and they're pervertly manifested or reflected when they're covered by this material body and mind. The activities of the material senses are perverted reflections of the activities of the original spiritual senses. In his diseased condition, the spirit soul engages in material activities under the material covering. Real sense enjoyment is possible only when the disease of materialism is removed. So, sense enjoyment, the actual perfect definition of sense enjoyment is when the living entity enjoys his spiritual senses. And that is possible, obviously, when he comes in contact with Hrishikesha. Okay, Sarvapadi Viran Muktam, Tatparatvena Nirmalam, Hrishikesha, Hrishikena, Sevaram Bhaktir, Chite. So, when our senses are engaged in the service of the master of the senses, then real sense enjoyment happens. So, sense enjoyment is not rejected, but we should know how sense enjoyment is to be engaged in. In our pure spiritual form, free from all material contamination, real enjoyment of the senses is possible. A patient must regain his health before he can truly enjoy sense pleasure again. And Srila Prabhupada uses this analogy about increasing and decreasing of fever. So he writes, thus the aim of human life should not be to enjoy perverted sense enjoyment, but to cure the material disease. Aggravation of the material disease is no sign of knowledge, but a sign of avidya or ignorance. And he gives an analogy. For good health, a person should not increase his fever from 105 degrees to 107 degrees, but should reduce his temperature to the normal 98.6. That should be the aim of human life. The modern trend of material civilization is to increase the temperature of the feverish material condition, which has reached the point of 107 degrees in the form of atomic energy. Okay, it's a play of word. So Srila Prabhupada is saying that already we are in avidya, already we are in ignorance, and our fever is reached the peak of 105, but then we are increasing material activities more and more. We still want to become more and more gross, you can say. So that is not the sign of advancement. So the modern trend is to increase the temperature, but healthy condition is when the temperature is regulated, it's maintained. Meanwhile, the foolish politicians are crying that at any moment the world may go to hell because of this materialistic advancement. So people can see, so it's not only the politicians, but even the sociologists and everybody, those who are a bit sober and who can understand what is going around them, they can see that this kind of progress is only leading people to hellish situation. Okay, it is not giving them any kind of happiness. Hellish situation means not that they are going to hellish planets. They would not know what hellish planets are, but they would know that the future generations are not going to have any amount of sense gratification. Although we are trying for that, so much advancement has been made, but as the generation progresses, the problems are going to increase, and solutions that are being proposed by the materialistic people, they are not enough, or these kind of solutions are only going to increase the problems more. They are not solutions actually. They are just seeds of new problems. So they understand that the world may go to hell at any moment. Okay, the politicians, sociologists, or those who study these things, they do understand, but they do not know the solution. What is to be done? They do not know that they are not this body. So ultimately, it always comes down to this. Ignorance, the manifestation of ignorance is false ego, where one understands, where one thinks that he is his body and not the soul. But the actual understanding is that one is not this body, but one is a spiritual living entity. That is the result of the advancement of material knowledge and the neglect of the most important part of life, the culture of spiritual knowledge. So this is the reason. This is the reason that one is only engaged in advancement of material knowledge, but he has neglected the most important part of life, the culture of spiritual knowledge. Śrī Īśopaniṣad herein warns that we must not follow this dangerous path leading to death, and we must develop the culture of spiritual knowledge so that we may become completely free from the cruel hands of death. So now, this does not mean, so this is the proper understanding of avidya, which we are speaking about. This does not mean that all activities for the maintenance of the body should be stopped. Because the body's matter does not mean all activities for the maintenance of the body should be stopped. There is no question of stopping activities, just as there is no question of wiping out one's temperature altogether when trying to recover from a disease. To make the best use of a bad bargain is the appropriate expression. The culture of spiritual knowledge necessitates the help of the body and mind. Therefore, maintenance of the body and mind is required if we are to reach our goal. The normal temperature should be maintained at 19.6 degrees, and the great sages and saints of India have attempted to do this by a balanced program of spiritual and material knowledge. They never allow the misuse of human intelligence for diseased sense gratification. So this is the proper understanding. Okay, so in one way, now if we see, in one way, avidya is ignorance, okay, where we are engaged only in materialistic activities. And because this body is also matter, okay, and as Srila Prabhupada writes here, there's no question of stopping activities for the maintenance of this body. So in one way, we have to maintain this material body also, okay, and that can be categorized as avidya, okay, because avidya relates to that which is dead or which is matter or which is ignorance. So this body is made up out of ignorance, but then this body is also a very good vehicle for engaging in spiritual life. We have proper intelligence. The human form of life specifically has proper intelligence, proper understanding. He can engage in devotional service actively to the Supreme Lord. So that is possible in this human form. And if the body is diseased, or as Srila Prabhupada gives this expression, if the fever is increased, then the service is stopped, okay, or it is hampered, it's affected. So by proper maintenance of this body, if it can be engaged in devotional service to the Lord, then avidya, where the maintenance of the body is there, the avidya also supports this mrityum tirtva, coming or transcending the stage of deathlessness, or sorry, the starting stage of death and attaining deathlessness. So this is the best use of a bad bargain. So in this particular mantra, avidya basically means the maintenance of this body for the sake of engaging in spiritual activities. Okay, so we have got this bad bargain of this material body. We do not have a spiritual body. So what's the best use of this bad bargain? We maintain this body so that we can render spiritual activity. We can do spiritual activities. We can engage in devotional service. So culture of spiritual knowledge necessitates the help of the body. Yeah, we have read this. The normal temperature should be maintained at 19.6 degrees. Okay, and we also read that it's a balanced program of spiritual and material knowledge. So this sense gratification or the maintenance of this body is regulated in Vedas under the principles of salvation. Human activities diseased by a tendency towards sense gratification have been regulated in the Vedas under the principles of salvation. So dharma, artha, kama is supposed to lead to moksha. And we have discussed this in the previous mantra also. This system employs religion, economic development, sense gratification and salvation. But at the present moment, people have no interest in religion or salvation. So dharma and moksha have been thrown out. People are engaged only, or they want only artha and kama. They have only one aim in life, sense gratification. And in order to achieve this end, they make plans for economic development. This also we discussed, that because kama is the goal of life and it comes from artha. And artha can be attained without dharma according to their understanding. So therefore there is no dharma. And because the goal itself is kama, therefore no moksha is required, no understanding of moksha. So artha and kama, these are the only things. Artha means economic development, as Srila Prabhupada writes here. So misguided men think that religion should be maintained because it contributes to economic development, which is required for sense gratification. So another aspect is either people don't completely reject dharma, okay, there's only artha and kama, or else because kama is the goal, people engage in dharma only to attain artha so that they can utilize that for their sense gratificatory activities. Thus, in order to guarantee further sense gratification after death, in heaven, there is some system of religious observance. But this is not the purpose of religion. Dharma's purpose is not artha and kama. Again, we have discussed this in the previous mantra. Dharma should be for moksha. And moksha is not that one becomes just free from these material activities, but moksha, muktir hitva nitharupam swarupena vyavasthitihi. Mukti or moksha means one is situated in his eternal constitutional position of service to Lord Vishnu. That is mukti. So dharma is meant for that purpose. And as a side benefit, dharma also gives artha, and which can be engaged in fulfilling material desires, like for kama, that can be categorized as kama. But artha and kama are side benefits, or rather artha is a side benefit which can be engaged in kama because we have this materialistic desire. But the consciousness should be that dharma is to be performed for attaining moksha, with the proper understanding of moksha also. We are not speaking about impersonal liberation here. So the path of religion is actually meant for self-realization, and economic development is required just to maintain the body in a sound, healthy condition. A man should lead a healthy life with a sound mind just to realize Vidya, true knowledge, which is the aim of human life. This life is not meant for working like an ass or for culturing Avidya for sense gratification. The path of Vidya is most perfectly represented in Srimad Bhagavatam, which directs a human being to utilize his life to inquire into the absolute truth. The absolute truth is realized step by step as Brahman, Paramatma, and finally Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. The absolute truth is realized by the broad-minded man who has attained knowledge and attachment by following the 18 principles of the Bhagavad Gita described in the Purport to Mantra 10. So if you see Avidya, in the previous slides, we saw that Avidya is categorized or this process of Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. This is engaging or this is categorized under the section of Avidya. And Vidya is specifically presented in Srimad Bhagavatam because Srimad Bhagavatam does not speak that Dharma, Artha, Kama is the goal of life or even the impersonal liberation is the goal of life. It speaks only about the absolute truth. So Srimad Bhagavatam speaks about devotional service. So devotional service will be Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Archanam, Mandram, Bhadisevaram, like that. So the 9 processes of devotional service. And Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha is the Vedic aspect, okay, where the purification or because the conditioned living entity has desires and then he has to purify himself, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha are presented in the Vedic literature itself to gradually elevate oneself to that point. But the path of Vidya, so that is the aspect of Avidya. Avidya is where we engage in Dharma, Artha, Kama and then with the goal of Moksha. But the perfect path of Vidya is presented in Srimad Bhagavatam, which is devotional service, which is not speaking about Dharma, Artha, Kama, but it's speaking only about Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Mantram, Dasim, Sakhyam, Atmanivedanam. So Srimad Bhagavatam speaks about these 9 things, whereas other Vedic literature speaks about Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. So that is Avidya, that's the aspect of Avidya, and this, the path of Vidya, is what is presented in Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, the center and yeah. So the absolute truth is realized by the broad-minded man who has attained knowledge and detachment by following the 18 principles of Bhagavad Gita described in the Purport to Mantra 10. So these 18 principles we discussed. And one of the main principles is having firm faith in the Lord. To understand that Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshana Darshanam. And that is one aspect. And another aspect was to have firm faith on the Lord to render him devotional service. Once these two are there, so as Srila Prabhupada writes here, no, the miseries are there to indirectly impel us to understand that this is not our position. So one should know the proper aspect of knowledge, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukkha Doshana Darshanam. One should understand that. And then he should engage in devotional service to the Lord. So these two principles, when it's understood, then all the other qualities of knowledge are automatically manifested. The central purpose of these 18 principles is the attainment of transcendental devotional service to the personality of Godhead. Therefore, all classes of men are encouraged to learn the art of devotional service to the Lord. Okay, that's the conclusion. The guaranteed path to the aim of Vidya is described by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Okay, so Vidya, as we discussed, Vidya is the path of Srimad Bhagavatam, which is perfectly present in Srimad Bhagavatam, and how devotional service should be rendered is there in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is not going to speak about Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. Nectar of Devotion is going to speak only, we will see that in our Bhakti Shastra classes, that the only goal is devotion. Okay, it's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu means it's going to speak about pure devotion. It's not going to speak about Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. It's not going to speak about that aspect of Vedic section which is called as Avidya, which can elevate one to deathlessness. It will not speak about that. It will speak about the direct process, the aim of Vidya. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu speaks that. The culture of Vidya is summarized in Srimad Bhagavatam 1 to 14 in the following words. Tasmad ekena manasa bhagavan satvatam pati shrotavya kirtitavyascha dhyayah pujasyascha nityada. Therefore, with one pointed attention, one should constantly hear about, glorify, remember and worship the personality of Godhead, who is the protector of the devotees. Unless religion, economic development and sense gratification aim toward the attainment of devotional service to the Lord, they are all simply different forms of nescience, as Śrī Īśopaniṣad indicates in the following mantras. Okay, so this, Shrotavya Kirtitavyascha Dhyaya Pujasyascha Nityada. So Upasana will be speaking about in 12, 13 and 14. There this concept will be explained in more detail. So religion, economic development and sense gratification should aim towards the devotional service to the Lord. Then avidya can be engaged, or it can lead to deathlessness. And the direct process is definitely this. Shrotavya, Kirtitavyascha, Dhyaya, Pujas, Chanityada. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Sparanam. Engaging that process is the path of Vidya. And if religion, economic, if Dharma, Artha, Kama is not engaged in devotional service to the Lord, they are simply different forms of nescience or avidya. And this avidya takes one to the darkest region, as spoken about in Mantra 9. Right? In Mantra 9, there is avidya, where one is actually ignorant. And then there is vidya, which is actually avidya, because it is the path of materialistic education or the path of Vedavada Rathas, okay, who engage in Dharma, Artha, Kama, okay, and the Maya Parta Jnana also. So they, although, as we discussed in 9th mantra, although they are engaged in the activities of the Vedas or that which is prescribed in the Vedas, there it is mentioned as Vidya, and that Vidya takes one to the darkest region. Okay, and that Vidya, or that which is actually mentioned as Vidya, but actually it is Avidya. Okay, so that Avidya without devotional service to the Lord, it is same as the Vidya which is mentioned in the 9th mantra. So here when it speaks about Avidya in the mantra 11, it is speaking about this Dharma, Artha and Kama which is engaged in the devotional service to the Lord. So it's understood that the goal of life is devotional service to the Lord, but I have inherent material desires. Okay, and I will not be able to engage myself completely 24 hours a day in only Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Sparanam like this. I have to fulfill my desires also. So how is the way? Where is the channel? Where is the path through which I will not be engaged in sinful activities to satisfy my senses? I will go according to that which is prescribed by the Supreme Lord himself. I will engage in dharma. Okay, I'll get some artha because that's the process. And then by that artha, I will also have some amount of sense gratification. And although I do understand that I'm following dharma only as a service to the Lord. So whatever artha I get, some part of it I'll give for myself, for my own enjoyment, but most part of it or a portion of it I'll give it to the Supreme Lord also. So this is also there in Bhagavad Gita 3rd chapter. If we see from text 4 to 9, so I will not be discussing that here, but I would suggest that you can go home, or rather you are at home, but then you can go back and read from the 4th verse to 9th verse, and how it is mentioned that a living entity cannot stop doing work. Okay, and at the end it says, therefore work has to be performed. One has to perform his prescribed duties. Without performing the prescribed duties, one cannot even maintain his own material body. But the work should be done for Lord Vishnu. Yajnathat karmno nyatra. That's the conclusion. So that comes in the verse 9. So the verse 4 and the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita speaks that nakarmanam anarambhan naishkarmyam purushoshnate rachasanyasa nadeva siddhir samadhi gacchati. One cannot stop doing work, because by not doing work, one cannot attain any perfection. But how that work should be done is then gradually explained from that verse onwards. And finally, the conclusion is given that work should be performed for the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu. Yajnathat karmano nyatra. So this is in summary of how Dharma, Artha and Kama should be engaged in devotional service to the Lord. Okay, so we'll just see the summary here. So Srila Prabhupada speaks about the cruel laws of nature at the start of the purport, and he says that one cannot avoid death, and the laws of nature are such that there is no immunity from old age, disease and death, and we have, by our materialistic activities, have created or accelerated the process of death by creating this nuclear bomb. Then advancement of knowledge cannot solve the problems, materialistic knowledge, and the famous example of Hiranakashipu is given, who is killed by Lord Nrsimhadev, the personality of Godhead. And we are also trying to be tiny Hiranyakashipus, but our plans are thwarted at every moment. And it's a one-sided attempt to win the struggle, which cannot help us. At any moment, the world may go to hell, as feared by the politicians. Which is the cruel law of nature. And the path of avidya is when the mental senses, the activities of mental senses, which are a perverted reflection. So this is the path of avidya. So we'll be discussing about two things, the path of avidya and the culture of avidya. So Srila Prabhupada in the purport, when he speaks about avidya, he uses both the terms. He says path of avidya and culture of avidya to say that both of them lead to, or both of them cannot lead to mrityum tirtva. They cannot lead to deathlessness. It leads it one down. Okay. But in the summary, what I have done is path of avidya is going down. But then Srila Prabhupada also speaks about the culture of avidya, or culturing or nurturing avidya, so that one can transcend deathlessness. So in the next slide, we will see that I would have mentioned the culture of avidya, just to distinguish between avidya, because two aspects of avidya has been discussed in this purport. One which takes one down, and one which can help one to go up. So path of avidya is what is taking one down, and I have mentioned culture of avidya, that which will take up. But in the purport, if we see, Srila Prabhupada uses the term culture of avidya also to explain that it will take one down. Okay, so you should not get confused when I explain that in the next slide, just to make that clear. So path of avidya is activities of material senses. It's a perverted reflection. It leads to repeated birth and death. And the foolish don't mind the process and undergo the same miseries, although the path of avidya leads one there. And it increases the feverish material condition. Okay, and unrestrained sense enjoyment also leads to the path of repeated birth and death. But in pure spiritual form, real sense enjoyment is possible, and that's what we should desire for. Okay, so now I have mentioned this culture of avidya. Okay, so culture of avidya is where we are nurturing, or avidya is being used for elevating oneself. Okay, so make best use of bad bargain. Maintenance of body and mind is required. So it's a balanced program of material and spiritual knowledge. So tendency of sense gratification is regulated in the Vedas through this dharma, artha, kama and moksha, through the varna ashrama system. Misguided men don't understand the real purpose of dharma, but actually dharma is meant for self-realization. Okay, and the culture of knowledge, vidya, is human form of life gives the best opportunity for culture of knowledge, vidya. The miseries indirectly remind incompatibility with matter. So that's also helping us in the culture of vidya. The Lord Krishna is more sorry than us for our suffering. So he sends his bona fide servants to propagate vidya. And he also sends the Vedic literatures, so Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Vedanta Sutra, like this. So he sends that because one can attain permanent life, go back to Godhead. He can be happy in this life and in the next also. We quoted the verse 2, 9.2 from Bhagavad Gita, and can be happy only by returning to spiritual home. So the living entity can be happy only by returning to the spiritual home, like this. And the transcendental devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the path of Vidya, is perfectly presented in Srimad Bhagavatam. And Vidya means attaining knowledge and detachment by the 18 principles. It's described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and it's summarized in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, Text 14, Tasmad Ekena Manasa, like this. So this is the summary. Now we will see some references. Okay. Yeah. So this is reference to this mantra 11, and I have several references, but we might not be able to go through all of them, but we'll get a good idea. So here, Srila Prabhupada is speaking about this Paravidya and Aparavidya. Okay, and this is in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, Chapter 19, Text 17, Purport. Srila Prabhupada quotes Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, and he says that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur gives the following commentary on the words Bhagavata Vichar. As confirmed with the Mundaka Upanishad, there are two kinds of educational systems. So then he quotes the mantra from Mundaka Upanishad, and he says there are two kinds of educational system. One deals with transcendental knowledge, Paravidya, and the other with material knowledge, Aparavidya. All the Vedas, the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda and Atharva Veda, along with their corollaries known as Shiksha, Kalpa, Vyakara, Nirukta, Chanda and Jyotish, belong to the inferior system of material knowledge, Aparavidya. Okay, so this is equal, or this is in reference to Avidya, because it's the inferior system of material knowledge. So this is called as Aparavidya. So now, when we say Avidya, again, this has to be understood. We are speaking from the context of mantra 11. So Aparavidya, when it is engaged in devotional service to the Lord, then that is the avidya that we are speaking about in mantra 11. Avidya mrityum tirtva is Aparavidya. But avidya itself, as ignorance, which is discussed in mantra 9 and mantra 10, it is not Aparavidya. Aparavidya is that which takes one to transcendence, okay, through a gradual process of purification. So that is Aparavidya. Aparavidya, when we are equating that with Avidya, it's only with respect to mantra 11 here, not with respect to mantra 9 and 10. So we should be clear on that. By Paravidya, one can understand the Akshara, Brahman, or the Absolute Truth. As far as the Vedic literature is concerned, the Vedanta Sutra is accepted as the Paravidya. Srimad Bhagavatam is an explanation of that Paravidya. Those who aspire for liberation, mukti or moksha, and introduce themselves as Vedantika are also equal to those groups aspiring to improve religion, dharma, artha, kama. So, see, one might say that we are discussing Upanishads now, and it's part of this Yajurveda, right? We have Vajasneyi Samhita like this. But we are saying it's an inferior system of material knowledge, Aparavidya. So how is that? So in the purport itself, Srila Prabhupada explains this. And he says that those who are aspiring for liberation, mukti or moksha, which specifically means the impersonal liberation. Okay, by studying Īśopaniṣad, after doing all the analysis, if one comes to the point that one has to attain moksha, merge into the Brahman, then that is also part of Avidya only. Okay, it's not Vidya. It's not Paravidya. So that's why it says, so those and introduce themselves Vedantika or the followers of the Vedas are equal to those groups aspiring to improve in Dharma, Artha and Kama. Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha are called Chaturvarga. They are all within the system of inferior material knowledge. So even impersonal liberation is inferior material knowledge only. Any literature giving information about the spiritual world, spiritual life, spiritual identity and the spirit soul is called Paravidya. So Paravidya means which speaks about these four things, about the spiritual world, not that only merging into Brahman, spiritual life. How is life in the spiritual world? What is our spiritual identity? What is Krishna's identity? And the spirit soul, the constitutional nature of the soul. This is called as Paravidya. That knowledge given in the Vedic literatures which does not directly speak about that, okay, or speaks only in an indirect way, that is Aparavidya, because it can lead one to that level, but then it cannot directly go. It's not a direct process, it's an indirect process. Srimad Bhagavatam does not have anything to do with the materialistic way of life. It gives transcendental information to educate people in the superior system of Paravidya. Okay. In Kunti's prayer, Kunti Maharani's prayer, Kunti Maharani says, this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 8, Text 35. Bhavesmin Krishyamananam Avidya Kama Karmabhihi. Okay. Shravana Smaranarhani Karishyan iti kechana. So she's speaking about when the Lord appears. Okay. The Lord appears. Okay, anyway, I'll read the translation. And yet others say that you appeared in order to renovate the devotional service of hearing, remembering, worshipping, and so on, in order that the conditioned soul suffering from material pangs might take advantage and gain liberation. Okay, so conditioned souls suffering from material pangs is Avidya Kama Karma Bhihi. And it's interesting to note, I have references also, that Avidya Kama Karma Bhihi actually appears several times in Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, Avidya Kama Karma Bhihi and Avidya Karma Sanyaya. So Avidya, the manifestation of ignorance itself, is that one engages in sense gratificatory activities. One engages in fruitive activities. So that's the perfect manifestation of Avidya. Okay, so Bhavesmin Krishyamananam. So those who are engaged or those who are suffering in this material world, because of what? Because of Avidya. And because of that Avidya, they engage in Kama Karma Bhihi, activities which are required or which they do only for sense gratification because of influence of ignorance, Avidya. For them to renovate or to deliver those people, and so the Lord appears. Karishyan iti kechana. Karishyan iti kechana, he appears. And what does he do? He renovates that process of devotional service. Shravana Smaranarhani. Shravana means hearing the pastimes of the Lord. Smarana means remembering him. And Arhani means worshipping the Lord. So he came for that particular purpose. And the purport, Srila Prabhupada speaks about this Avidya. And he says, the illusioned living beings, out of misunderstanding only, become servants of the senses by material desire. Avidya Kama Karma Bhihi. This desire is called Avidya or nescience. And out of such illegitimate desire, the living beings make different plans for material enjoyment, centered about a perverted sex life. He therefore becomes entangled in the chain of birth and death by transmigrating into different bodies. Unless therefore one is beyond the boundary of this nescience, one cannot get free from the threefold miseries of material life. That is the law of nature. So we are speaking about avidya here. Okay, avidya as it's normally understood. This and even if we see the purport that we discussed today, Śrīla Prabhupada spends lots of time in discussing about this avidya. Although the mantra itself speaks that how avidya can be used to transcend death. This is different. This is, as we discussed before at the start of this session, there are several quotes which Śrīla Prabhupada writes and explains avidya in different ways. So we are trying to assimilate that. Adoption of all the above mentioned items, which is hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshipping, praying, cooperating, and surrendering unto Him, to the Lord. By adoption of all the above mentioned activities, mentioned items, or any one of them can help a conditioned soul get out of the tangle of nescience and thus become liberated from all material sufferings. So this is mentioned here. Then, this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 6, Text 21, Purport. The material body is a symbol of the gross and subtle form of forgetfulness. Therefore, the whole atmosphere of the material world is called avidya or nescience, whereas the whole atmosphere of the spiritual world is called vidya. So this material world is avidya and spiritual world is vidya. This is another understanding. There are different stages of avidya and they are called dharma, artha, kama and moksha. The idea of moksha or liberation held by the monist in the matter of oneness of the living entity and the Lord by ultimate merging into one is also the last stage of materialism or forgetfulness. So therefore we said whatever is mentioned in all the four Vedas, that is avidya. Okay. It can be used to transcend this material world, but inherently for the Vedavadarthas and the Maya Pahrita Jnanas, it keeps them within this material world. Knowledge of the qualitative oneness of the self and super self is partial knowledge and ignorance. Okay, so knowledge of qualitative oneness is partial knowledge and ignorance because there is no knowledge of quantitative difference. Quality wise, there is oneness, but the quantity wise difference also should be understood, or else it's partial knowledge and ignorance. In the field of nescience, activities are directed towards lording it over, okay, which we have discussed, and there's always a clash and frustration, which are the symptoms of nescience. So one who is ignorance will always be fighting. Okay, there will always be materialistic problems. And Śrīla Prabhupada spoke a lot about this, that people, there's no peace in this world because there's a lack of Krishna consciousness. Of course, any problem that we try to solve on the same material level, it will always lead to more problems and frustration. But in the field of knowledge, there is devotional service to the Lord. Therefore, there is no chance of being contaminated by avidya. The Lord is just the proprietor of the fields, both of nescience and cognition, and it remains a choice of the living entity to exist in either of the above regions. Okay. So this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 10, Text 17, where this is a proper understanding of avidya. The energy of the Lord called avidya is the bewildering factor of the conditioned souls. The material nature is called avidya or ignorance. But to the devotees of the Lord engaged in pure devotional service, this energy, referring to avidya, becomes vidya or pure knowledge. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. The energy of the Lord transforms from Mahamaya to Yoga Maya and appears to pure devotees in her real feature. Okay. So it's not the activity in themselves, but actually it's the consciousness, it's the attitude. So avidya, transforming avidya into vidya, it is up to us. Okay. The material nature therefore appears to function in three phases: as the creative principle of the material world, as ignorance, and as knowledge. As disclosed in the previous verses in the fourth creation of, okay, this in context of Srimad Bhagavatam, the conditioned souls are not originally fools, but by the influence of the avidya function of material nature, they are made into fools, and thus they are unable to utilize knowledge in the proper channel. Okay, so it's mentioned, no, material nature appears in three phases: as the creative principle. Okay, as creative principle means as prakriti, that which creates. As ignorance is avidya, and knowledge as vidya. And if we remember the last two commentaries, the last two mantras, 9th and 10th, the commentaries by Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, you will see how we saw how he defined vidya and avidya both as aspects of material energy of the Lord. Avidya binds one to this material world and vidya liberates one from this material world, but both are aspects of this material nature. Okay, so more about Avidya. This is the commentary of Śrī Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur to Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 12, Text 2, where 5 types of Avidya is mentioned. Okay, Tamas, Moha, Mahamoha, Tamishra and Andhatamishra. And he says Tamas is when one is ignorant of the Swarupa of the Jiva. Moha means when one's illusion to identify the self with the body. Mahamoha is when one applies the possessiveness to objects of enjoyment. So sense, self-understanding with the body. So me is moha and mine is mahamoha. Tamishra means the appearance of anger within the mental functions when one's object of enjoyment is obstructed. It leads to frustration. So tamas, moha, mahamoha is there, but when one becomes frustrated and angry, it becomes even more ignorant. No? He becomes, that's called as tamishra. And andhatamishra means an unconscious state brought on by anger. This means death. So none of these are present in the jiva, they were created by ignorance or avidya. So the jiva does not possess tamas, moha, mahamoha, tamishra, andhatamishra like this. But by the function of avidya, as we entangle more and more into rajoguna and tamoguna, they envelop us more and more. And then he also quotes from Vishnu Purana, and he says tamas means lack of discrimination, moha means mistaken identity, mahamoha, desire for happiness, and tamishra is anger, and the tamishra means death. And all of these 5 made their appearance from Lord Brahma, okay, just to bewilder the living entities. Okay, so we will skip a few of these. Okay, so we'll see this from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 11, Text 3, Purport. So according to Srila Madhvacharya, Vidya indicates the goddess of fortune, the internal potency of the Lord, whereas Avidya indicates Durga, the external potency of the Lord. Ultimately, however, the personality of Godhead can transform his potencies according to his own desire, as explained by Srila Prabhupada in his commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam 1.3.34. And it's quoting Srila Prabhupada here. Because the Lord is the absolute transcendence, all of his forms, names, pastimes, attributes, associates, and energies are identical with him. His transcendental energy acts according to his omnipotency. The same energy acts as his external, internal, and marginal energies. And by his omnipotency, he can perform anything and everything through the agency of any of the above energies. He can turn the external energy into internal by his will. So I think we discussed this in our Śrī Īśopaniṣad sessions, that for Krishna, he does not see distinctions between his energies. For him, everything is his energy. Okay. So, but for the living entity, he has to distinguish. Being in the marginal position, he has to distinguish between what is external and what is internal. But for the Supreme Lord, it's all the same. And that's why how to understand this, because its material nature is created and destroyed, and the Lord does do the creation and destruction also. Whereas in the spiritual world, there is no creation and there is no destruction. It is eternal. But then both of them are energy of the Lord, and we are also saying that the Lord sees all his energies as the same. So how do we understand this? We see the distinction. Spiritual world is like this, material world is like this, and the Lord is also involved in both of them. But then he does not see any difference between both of these, because he sees them as his energy only. This is inconceivable for us to understand. From our point of view, for us, the material creation is not conducive for us. Material creation is not good for us. Material creation binds us in the living entity, binds us.
Prabhupada gives an example of electric powerhouse.
Yes.
Transform
Yes.
heat.
Yes. Yeah. So material nature is something which we do not desire, or the living entity, or rather we do desire, but it is understood as something which is horrible, or which binds one, which leads the living entity to a miserable situation. But the spiritual nature is where the living entity can manifest his Sat, Chit and Ananda form, completely, fully. So therefore we have to make a distinction. But for the Lord, although he might be, if he's there in spiritual world, yes, but when he comes to the material world also, he's not impacted by any of these. Okay, he always comes by his own yoga maya. He always comes by his own internal potency. So for him, there is no difference. It does not matter wherever he goes, wherever he is, it's always completely spiritual. It always completely is perfect. So he does not see any difference between his external or internal energy. And he does not see any difference between him and the marginal energies also. He thinks these energies are mine, the living entities are mine. They complete me. So that we also discussed about how intimately we are connected to Krishna in that way. So Krishna does not see difference between the living entities and himself. Although there is principally, from Tattva point of view, there is a difference, definitely. But then in terms of pastimes, in terms of being intimate with his devotees, with the living entities, he does not see any difference. So he wants to serve the living devotees and devotees want to serve him. It's like that. So by his omnipotency, he can perform anything and everything. And in Madhya Leela, Chaitanya Charitamrita, these three verses are quoted. This is from Vishnu Purana. Vishnu Shakti Para Prokta, Kshetragnyakhya Tatha Para, Avidya Karma Samnyaya, Tritiya Shaktir Īśyate. So we have discussed this already. Vishnu Shakti Para Prokta. The Vishnu Shakti is Para Prakriti. That's the internal potency of the Lord. Kshetragnyakhya Tatha Para. The Kshetragya, which is the living entity, he is also Para. But Avidya Karma Samnyaya, this Avidya, in which living entities are engaged in karmic activities, this is the Tritiya Shakti of the Lord. This is the third Shakti of the Lord. Yaya Kshetragya Shakti sa Veshchidan Nripa Sarvaga Samsara Tapan Akhilan Avapnoti Atra Santatan Taya Tirhoti Tattvacha Shakti Kshetragya Sangita Sarva Bhuteshu Bhupala Tarattamyena Vartate. So this means the Kshetragya Shakti is the living entity. Although he has the facility to live in either the material or the spiritual world, he suffers the threefold miseries of material existence because he is influenced by the Avidya potency, which covers his constitutional position. This living entity covered by the influence of nations exists in different forms in the material condition, O king. He is disproportionately freed from the influence of the material energy to greater or lesser degrees. And then, as I told, Avidya Kama Karma Bhi, as Kunti Maharani prays, it comes in several places. It's there in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, then again in Canto 5, then also he mentions that in the lectures. Okay. So we'll just see the commentary of Vedanta Deshika. And just before that, we'll probably just a quick 1 minute to see. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 28, Text 13. Jano vai loka etasmin avidya kama karma bhihi uchcha vachasu gatishu naveda swam gatim brahman. So we see avidya kama karma bhihi is here also. It comes here also. But then the meaning is completely different. So Lord Krishna is thinking, certainly people in this world are wandering among higher and lower destination, which they achieve through activities performed according to their desires and without full knowledge. Thus, people do not know their real destination. Okay, and I think we have to discuss the purport for this also. But I would suggest that you go to this purport and then Srila Prabhupada, sorry, not Srila Prabhupada, but his disciples. The purport mentions about the commentary of Jiva Goswami in this connection. Okay, and there he gives a completely different understanding of Avidya Kama Karma Bhihi. And he says that the devotees of the Lord, okay, they do not know that he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Vrindavan, so therefore they are in Avidya. They do not have the knowledge of the superiority of the Supreme Lord. And they're engaged in Avidya Kama Karma Bhihi. Okay, so because of that Avidya, they're engaged in satisfying the desires of Krishna. Okay, they are so intimately related to him that his friends, his mother, or those who are in Vatsalya Rasa and those who are in Madhurya Rasa, they do not understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the creator of everybody like this. Okay, for them, no, he's just their object of love. So that's Avidya Kama Karma Bhi for him. So all they are in ignorance. But that ignorance is the perfection of ignorance, we can say. That ignorance is where they are engaged only in serving the Lord, like this. So yeah, so you can read the purport for this. It's the 10th canto, chapter 28, text 13. So we'll just quickly see the commentary of Vedanta Deshika and then we'll stop. So Vedanta Deshika speaks about two things. Okay, he says Avidya means prescribed duties and Vidya means knowledge. That knowledge which leads to liberation. And if we remember from Mantra 9 and 10 also, Vedanta Deshika gives the same meaning. how karma is avidya and vidya is this knowledge. So he who knows prescribed duties and knowledge together, who practices both together with duties as an assistant to knowledge, crosses over karma, which causes repeated death by performance of duties which purify him, and attains the faultless Lord by meditation on the Lord. So avidya is mentioned as something which supports vidya, and that knowledge which leads to liberation. So in Vedantic Deshika's commentary for this particular mantra, more stress or more prominence is given to liberation. Okay, and knowledge leads to liberation. Transcendental knowledge leads to liberation, and karma is only for purification. So the primary aspect is vidya, that is knowledge, and the avidya part is there only to support the vidya, which leads to purification and finally to transcendental knowledge. So this is similar to what we have been discussing in Srila Prabhupada's purport, but there are some little bit differences also which we will not get into. So he says that karma is a secondary practice, and one who is the possessor of both, one who has both avidya as well as vidya with the proper understanding that karma is meant, or the activities which are mentioned in the Vedic literatures are meant for purification. So one who has this proper understanding that karma is a secondary practice which will support my primary practice of attaining transcendental knowledge, which will ultimately lead me to liberation, that person can, for him, avidyaya mrityum tirtva and vidyaya amritam ashnute. That will happen. So one must have this kind of understanding, is what he says. Okay. Yeah, and then he quotes the Śrī Bhashya and says the Śrī Bhashya has explained avidya as karma or prescribed duties, which are assistants to knowledge, because of the context of the discussion and the suitable meaning it produces. What is meant by the word avidya is karma, actions prescribed by varna ashrama. The avidya acknowledged as a means of crossing over death is that which is opposite to vidya. The word avidya excludes knowledge, just as the use of the word kshatriya excludes brahmana. All acts performed and not included in knowledge should come within the scope of karma. Okay, so what he's saying is karma is independent of vidya. Okay, and karma means the actions prescribed in varnashrama, and karma is meant to take one to transcendental knowledge. But one cannot say that just by performing prescribed duties and not gaining transcendental knowledge, both will give the same result. No, karma is meant only for purification process. But actually, one must cultivate or one must culture transcendental knowledge also. So that is required. Okay, but our understanding is we see it as a stage in which one person or the devotional activities are prominent. Okay, we are not speaking about gaining transcendental knowledge to get liberation, but our process is to render devotional service to the Lord. So karma, which is mentioned in the Vedic literatures as a purificatory process to gain transcendental knowledge, is there. But how we define, because the goal of life or the purpose of all Vedic literature is to attain transcendental loving devotion to the Lord, even those activities of varnashrama can be an aspects of devotional service. Okay, so those activities which are performed by, say, a brahmana is there and is performing his duties just for pleasing the Lord, those activities also become part of devotional service. Kshatriya who does his activities, or Vaishya who does his activities, as all the engaged in varnashrama duties but is done for pleasing the Lord, those also become an aspect of devotional service. Okay, so it's not the transcendental knowledge as such as mentioned by the Sri Vaishnavas, but then it's the aspect of devotional service. So there just the perspective changes. The understanding is same. The perspective changes such that the focus is more on liberation. Okay, because the mantra itself speaks about liberation. Mrityum tirtva amritam ashnute, going beyond deathless, going beyond death, attaining the state of deathlessness. So that is, as the point of liberation. But as seen in Srila Prabhupada's purport and our proper understanding is that devotional service is the actual liberation. It's the actual Amrita. It's not only the aspect of liberation. So Vedanti Deshika speaks about knowledge which leads to liberation. But for us, it is devotional service, for which mukti comes attached to that, along with it directly. Like this. Okay. So Baldev Vidyabhushan is speaking similarly, that one should perform jnana and karma together, and they mutually assist each other. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he says that, yeah, I'll just read this. The ideal forms of both Vidya and Avidya exist in the Chit Shakti. Or as I read from the first. Maya, which is the shelter of both Vidya and Avidya, is not completely different from the Chit Shakti of the Lord, but rather its shadow, a modification. Whatever is in a shadow exists in the original object in complete and faultless form. Thus, without doubt, the ideal forms of both Vidya and Avidya exist in the Chit Shakti, which means it exists in the spiritual energy of the Lord. The ideal forms of Vidya and Avidya. The perverted forms of Vidya and Avidya was discussed in Mantra 9. Okay, and the ideal forms of Vidya and Avidya is discussed in Mantra 11. The perverted forms is where Vidya and Avidya both take one down to darkest regions. The ideal forms of Vidya and Avidya, they both take one to the spiritual realm. So, if the Jiva is striving for the spiritual forms, takes care to destroy the perverted forms of Vidya and Avidya in matter, then he can see the variety of quality in the spiritual energy, which means he sees the ideal forms of Vidya and Avidya. Okay. By seeing the ideal spiritual counterpart, material Avidya becomes transformed into the ideal counterpart. Then the Jiva, with a clear realization of his own spiritual form, the form of Paramatma, and the spiritual relation, can experience spiritual rasa. Okay, so this ends our discussion on Mantra 11. So yeah, it's a good conclusion that we saw this commentary from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that Vidya and Avidya, they have their ideal forms. So Avidya can also be engaged in devotional service to the Lord through the practices of Varna and Ashrama institution. And Vidya is definitely the perfect process as presented in Srimad Bhagavatam. And this Avidya differs from the Avidya which was mentioned in Mantra 9. Okay, this is the Upanishadic language. Although all the three mantras are speaking about Vidya and Avidya only, but the understanding that it gives is different. In Mantra 9, Vidya and Avidya both take to the darkest region, and in Mantra 11, Vidya and Avidya both take to deathlessness. So this is how it is to be understood. Okay, so if you have any questions, those who are watching it online, if you have any questions, you can send a message via WhatsApp to me, and I'll answer it in the group itself, or else I'll answer it in the class tomorrow before we start our discussion. Okay, so we will stop here, and tomorrow we'll do the discussion of Mantra 12. Śrīla Prabhupada ki, Śrī Īśopaniṣad ki. Prabhu, can you call Gaur Bhagan Prabhu? I think he has to stop this. End stream.
Krishna.